Welcome back to Steve Sports Weekly Report, Episode 2. First off, I do want to apologize for missing Tuesday and Sunday's episodes. I had one of the craziest weeks of my life between life, my job, and then video content. It's just been a crazy week. I had a huge turnout at the Bridgeport Blue Chips Hoop Summit event. I had over 40 players sign up. I appreciate all you guys and your patience and understanding throughout the week. But here we are for episode 2, and in this episode, we're going to check out my top 5 games in each class of West Virginia, and then we're going to go over 2 awards at the end of the episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that. I also want to give a huge thanks to all you guys for your support. Episode 1 reached 1,000 views and gained over 70 new subscribers. I do appreciate all the love and support. So don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and even comment below. Also share with a West Virginia high school football fan so we can give away these WVU football tickets once we reach 700 subscribers. So without further ado, let's hop into episode 2 and start with my top 5 games in Class Single A. First off at number 5 is Clay Battelle versus Cameron to open the season. The game of the week in Single A is a rematch of the semifinal game last year. The CBs look to take down Marshall Hall and the Dragons again after beating them 24-12 to make the state championship game last season. They'll both return all-state players in the backfields and were 2 of the top defensive teams in the class last year. If this game was a little bit later in the season, it'd be hard to keep it out of the top spot, but I do think it should be the biggest challenge for the CBs this year. Number 4, St. Mary's versus Wirt County. A matchup coming the last week of the season that could have seeding implications on the line. Last year, St. Mary's beat Wirt on the last game of the regular season 48-15, which set them up with a home playoff game and a rematch against Wirt again in round 1 just a week later. This time, the Tigers got quick revenge on St. Mary's 27-14 to advance in the playoff and end St. Mary's season. The Blue Devils return senior quarterback Jeremiah DeMoss, but Wirt replaces their multi-year starter this season. They'll have some great skill players to make it easier for whoever takes over under center, and I think this could end up being a top 10 matchup heading into the playoffs. Number 3 on my list is the Class A headliner in Week 2 between Pendleton County and East Hardy. If you watched this playoff game last year, you got blessed with a barn-burning overtime game between 2 of the best quarterbacks in Class A. I don't expect this game to be any different. Both Colton Robertson and Trevor Roof return, setting up another epic showdown. Roberson is the D1 athlete with a Marshall offer who puts up video game-like numbers, while Roof might be the most overlooked quarterback in the entire state, putting up ridiculous numbers himself. If he has a big game and East Hardy pulls out the win this time around, he'd insert his Cougars into the top 5 and maybe himself into the early J.R. House Award conversations. At number 2, Tug Valley versus Sherman. This game could end up deciding a home playoff game for one of these teams. Tug Valley, I think, could be a top 8 seed entering the playoffs this year, while Sherman was number 5 last year. Both teams return a large chunks of production, including quarterbacks. They played last year when Preston May was healthy, and he led the Panthers to a 51-16 win over the Tide. If he can do it this year, I think Tug Valley has a good chance of having a home playoff game come round 1. Number 1, Cameron versus Pendleton County. 2 of the best teams in the class square off the last week of the season, setting up what could be a top 3 seed clinching game. Both teams enter the year in my top 5 and return some of the best players in the state in Class A. Last season in this matchup, Cameron's Marshall Holland rushed for 150 yards with 3 touchdowns, while Roberson put up nearly 300 yards and 3 touchdowns himself in a 36-28 win for Pendleton County. This could be the game of the year in Single A. Moving to Class 2A, where some insane matchups happened this regular season. At number 5, I have Moorfield versus Berkeley Springs. Both of these teams were young and missed the playoffs last season, but they also return a bunch of their best players this year, which sets them both up to sneak into the top 16. Berkeley Springs returns quarterback Jalen Miller and his top target Kyle Moore, while Moorfield returns a 2-headed rushing monster in Caleb Flynn and the young Matthew Iman. This game is the last week of the season, allowing both teams to grow up a bunch before this important matchup that could determine their playoff fates happen. At number 4, I have Williamstown versus Doddridge County. If you only watch this game to see some of the best linemen in Class 2A, it would be worth it. Williamstown has dominant edge Christian Hoosier, and Doddridge has talented interior Jacob Britton.
Both are elite game changers and lead their teams into the year as borderline top 10 teams. Doddridge does have a few more questions to answer than Williamstown to me, as they have to replace their starting quarterback and 1,000-yard rusher Lyric Blake. Williamstown returns Breck Allen at quarterback, but do lose a 1,000-yard rusher themselves. I think both teams are around that top 10 spot, meaning this game could have seeding implication more than they think. Number 3, Clay County versus Roane County. These two played twice last season, with Roane getting the better in the regular season, but Clay County poured it on Roane in the playoffs, eliminating the Raiders in the first round. But Clay returns a giant bulk of production, including quarterback Cooper Collins, running back Brody Scarborough, and wide receiver Joel Elliott. Roane returns two 1,000-yard rushers in Javon Latorno and Colton Starcher, making this a loaded game of star power in 2A football. Roane is one of my sleeper teams this year, but Clay County has all the pieces to be one as well, and that's why this game is so high on my list. I think this game could decide a home playoff game for one of these teams. The final two games both include one team, the number 2 ranked Independence Patriots. At my number 2 spot is Bluefield versus Independence. A battle of number 1 and 2 in my rankings would usually be the top game to watch on the year. Both teams return all-state quarterbacks, top of the state defenses no matter the class, and brought in some of the best transfers in the state. Brock Green versus Max Simpson is the quarterback battle of the year in 2A, and I expect this game to be absolute fireworks. If this game was any later in the season, I think it would be easily number 1 on my list, but that's going to go to Frankfort versus Independence. Another battle of top 3 teams in mine and probably everyone else's rankings for 2A football. Frankfort is a 2-time defending champion, while Independence has assembled arguably the best team in the state. On paper, Frankfort doesn't have the same firepower, but let's be honest, people have said that for years about the Falcons, and they continue to reload and compete at the top of the class. This game comes just 2 weeks before the season ends, meaning this game could decide one of the top 3 seeds in the playoffs, on top of being an absolute barn burner of a game. Moving to 3A, where there's a bunch of great matchups that could end up meaning more than people realize. Starting at number 5 is Ripley versus Brooke. This game, being the last week of the season between two borderline playoff teams, is one that could determine if either, both, or neither make the playoffs this season. Ripley is one of the more underrated teams in the class to me, returning playmaking brothers Parker and Peyton Keller alongside senior quarterback Jackson Moore. Brooke is a young, talented team who I think could take a big step forward this year as well. They have one of the best linebacking cores in the class, led by Grant Yost and Cole Bolin, and have a couple 2029 athletes waiting to break out, along with 2029 quarterback Camden Sperringer. This is just a fun late-season game with some playoff implications, in my opinion. At number 4, I have Fairmont Senior versus Elkins. This game, to me, is going to be one of the premier end-of-the-game matchups in 3A. Fairmont Senior loses a group of seniors and transfers that aren't easy to replace, but they have a ton of young players waiting to break out. Anthony Smith is one of the best quarterbacks in the state, and while I do think the Polar Bears have the toughest schedule in 3A football, this one to me is the most important game as the season winds down. There's a chance Fairmont Senior enters this game with 4 losses, and that makes his game before playing Powerhouse Bridgeport have a ton of playoff implications for them. Elkins returns a scary backfield combo and record-breaking running back Jaden Hatfield and Seth Robinson. They'll be running behind a good chunk of the offensive line from last year. They're one of my favorite sleeper teams in the class, and I think a big win over Fairmont Senior solidifies them as title contenders. At number 3, I have another Elkins game in Elkins versus North Marion. To me, this is the toughest game of North Marion's schedule. If they make it to this game undefeated, this could determine if the Huskies run the table in the regular season or not. We talked about Elkins returning stars a few times, and they really only need to replace their multi-year starting quarterback, which is a similar situation for the Huskies this year. Both teams are incredibly deep on the offensive line and have some of the best running backs in the class. North Marion's Brian Poindexter Jr. was a 1,000-yard rusher while splitting carries. He should be poised to handle the bulk of the offense this year. At the very least, this is going to be one of the more fun games to watch in 3A, but I do think it holds some high playoff stakes for seeding as well. At number 2, I have South Charleston versus Winfield. These are two teams that are in my top 10 rosters heading into the season, and this game could even hold home playoff game implications. Winfield is returning All-State quarterback Jared Miller, who had 6 touchdowns versus the Black Eagles last season and a 42-6 win for the Generals. They'll also add back top 2A player Aiden Tate and a 1,000-yard rusher Gannon Boggs, which should give South Charleston all they can handle again this year. South Charleston is loaded with D1 talent after Donnie Mays went out and got a great haul in the final open transfer window of West Virginia football. Now, with young weapons like Devin Lazo and Miles Terry, and adding transfer speedster Malachi Hope, all behind one of the best trenches in the state, I don't think Winfield dominates quite like they did last year, and I think this game holds a little more weight for a top 10 seed in a home playoff game than people realize. And coming in at number one, I have Herbert Hoover versus Princeton, a battle of top three preseason teams in my rankings that could end up deciding whether Hoover is the number one seed heading into the playoffs. The Huskies have arguably the best roster in the state, led by all state players at every level, and they could be undefeated heading into this game. This should be one of the more fun games to watch in all of 3A with the talent on the field for both teams. I think both have future D1 running backs in David Robinson Jr. and Aaron Hood Jr., and talented dual threat quarterbacks with Peyton Grigsby and Jake Belcher, and some of the best offensive line play you're going to find. It may not determine much other than if Herbert Hoover will enter their matchup against 4A powerhouse Huntington undefeated and possibly clinch the top 3A seed, but it is a battle of two title contenders near the end of the season and a rematch of an electric semifinal game a year ago that Princeton won 41-36. At the very least, you're watching two of the most electric teams in the class battle it out in a regular season showdown. Moving on to 4A football, at number 5, I have most people's top opening week game between Jefferson and Spring Mills. Both teams were a revolving door this summer, losing some stars from a year ago and also bringing in new ones in the portal. These are two of the hardest schedules in the class, where both teams you can look at and think they could end up 8-2 or they could end up 4-6. There's a ton of toss-up games against some extremely talented programs for both these teams, which means this week one game could hold even more weight in the playoff rankings than they imagined. This EPAC battle was a lot of fun to watch over the summer in 7-on-7, where the skill players didn't really show too much separation. In fact, I think these teams are almost mirror images in a lot of ways. The only clear edge to me is Spring Mill's offensive line over Jefferson's. This should be a can't-miss opening week game, though. At number 4, I have Cabell Midland versus Woodrow Wilson. This is a game I feel a lot of people saw on the schedule and probably shrugged off, but I think it has top 10 seeding implications written all over it. After starting a ton of underclassmen and going 1-9, the Cabell Midland Knights used the rebuilding year to develop one of the top trenches on both sides of the ball in the class. They welcomed back Carson Christian, who's a top 5 college prospect in West Virginia's 2028 class, giving them a playmaker to run behind that big line. Also returning a talented line and tough run game is Woodrow Wilson. Gage Price and Gage Burdett lead the always challenging wing T offense, where they put up huge numbers last season. This game might be one of the slower paced games with both teams implementing run heavy approaches, but I do think this could be a lot of fun and a game that determines who's ahead of who in the playoff seedings. Number 3, George Washington versus Huntington. One of the few matchups that feel 50-50 for the Highlanders this year is this matchup against a championship caliber GW team. Both teams entered top 5 in my rankings with some of the best skill rooms in 4A, and while Huntington is usually known for creating D1 level linemen, it's the Patrons who sport the better offensive line in this matchup. GW has a real chance to enter this game undefeated if the talent pans out the way it should on paper. Last year, Huntington had their way in a 30-10 win, and they'll need their defense to repeat that performance and hold star running back Jaden Black to under 60 yards of offense again. That might be easier said than done when having to replace 7 starters on that side of the ball, but one thing's for certain. Billy Seals is one of the best talent developers in West Virginia, and this team will be ready for this late season matchup. At my number 2 game, Morgantown versus University. Although the Mohegans have owned the all-time series in the Mohawk Bowl and have won 7 of the last 8 meetings, this season just feels a little different for the Hawks. While Morgantown won this matchup 21-0 last season, they do have a few more question marks than University entering the season. Both teams will field all-state level quarterbacks with Morgantown's Maddox Twigg and University's Harrison Helbig, but the Hawks do have a lot more in place from last year. All-state level wide receivers in Hayden George and KK Lewis, with the two-headed rushing threat in Jaden Catcher and Brody Keeler, all behind one of the top lines in West Virginia. Morgantown brought in 2 small class transfers in Lyric Blake and Rudy Carrillo, who should have big impacts, but you can't overlook the Hawks' production in Class 4A last year. This is a battle of top 3 teams in my rankings, and I think is going to be the best insulation in the Mohawk Bowl in the last few years. At number 1, and no surprise, is the rematch of last year's 4A state championship game as Martinsburg travels to Morgantown to take on the defending champions. Maddox Twigg looks to repeat his heroic state title performance, while a motivated and focused Bulldog team seeks revenge. Twig has become the most popular high school star in the state, and rightfully so. He's the best quarterback prospect to ever come out of West Virginia. He tortured Martinsburg in both games last year on the ground, and Martinsburg's main reason for winning the regular season matchup was incredible coverage and constant pressure when he used his arm. The Mohegans do replace some big pieces, including his top three wide receivers, but with Maddox Twig, they always have a chance. For the Bulldogs, they do return an insane amount of production from a year ago. Boston Todd is, in my opinion, the top player in the state, and Brian Dick isn't too far behind him. They lead one of the deepest skill rooms in all of West Virginia and look poised for massive senior seasons. If you have the ability to make it to this game, you should do it. Not only will it be the two best teams in the state battling for the number one ranking, it'll be two, maybe even three Kennedy Award candidates, two of the top coaches, and two of the most storied programs at the best high school football venue in West Virginia. Moving on to our award watch list segment, and we're going to check out the Kennedy Award and the J.R. House Award watch list as we head into the 2026 season. Starting with the J.R. House Award, given to the top quarterback in the state. Last year, Maddox Twig became the youngest player to win the award as a sophomore and rightfully enters this season at the top of my list. He's got an incredible arm, runs like a running back, and is a true leader on the field. He's going to be hard to beat out for this award, but here's a few players I think have a chance. First, let's fill you in on a few dark horses for the award. My first is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the 2028 class, Anthony Smith. Smith has all the talent and production to win this award. He threw for 2,200 yards and 26 touchdowns last year, and if he could lead the Polar Bears in a dominant season with a lot of his top guys leaving from a year ago, I think he could find himself firmly in the J.R. House Award conversation. I do think he's going to be in a lot of people's top 5 for this award entering the year, but in mine, he's just outside as we start the season. Next dark horse is Class A standout Trevor Roof. I know it's a lot harder for smaller classes to take these awards, but Trevor Roof absolutely should be in the conversation. After posting 2,800 total yards and 43 touchdowns a year ago, he's still flying under the radar in my opinion. East Hardy is a team I think could surprise a lot of people this season, and if they end up 8-2 with a top 5 seed come playoff time, it's going to be because of Roof's play, and in that case, I don't see how he could be left out of the conversation for the J.R. House Award. I'm expecting a huge year from one of Single A's top quarterbacks. Now on to my number 5 ranking, I have Independence quarterback Brock Green. Green enters his junior year a 2-time All-State quarterback and owner of a 17-6 record as a starter. He's going to have one of the best receiving corps in AA this year, and coming off a record-setting sophomore season, throwing for almost 3,000 yards and 29 touchdowns, he could have an even better year this year. If he can help Independence on a title run, I wouldn't be surprised if he's holding the J.R. House Award at the end of the year. Next up is Herbert Hoover's Peyton Grigsby. Another stat-stuffing quarterback as a sophomore, Grigsby put up an insane 3,200 yards and 36 touchdowns, leading the Huskies to a 9-3 record. This year, he returns a lot of his weapons and should be in the conversation for this award all year long as the Huskies chase a 3A state title. His numbers might not look as flashy this year, but he's going to be a huge piece to the puzzle. Coming in at number 3 is University's Harrison Helbig. The top quarterback in West Virginia's 2027 class is the 6'5" gunslinger. He had a great junior year, putting up 3,100 yards and scoring 35 total touchdowns, breaking 2 of University's passing records en route to a semifinal berth. He wouldn't miss the semifinals due to a concussion, but is motivated to get the Hawks back into state title contention again this year. If Helbig puts up another big year, don't be surprised if he's battling Twig for this award. And lastly, at number 2 is Bluefield's Max Simpson. When you look at quarterbacks in the West Virginia 2028 class, most people gravitate to Twig as they should, but Bluefield's Max Simpson is every bit as electric and productive. Posting 3,400 pass yards and 41 touchdowns last year, he had some records rewritten as he broke multiple school records and even the AA state title game record for passing yards and touchdowns, earning MVP honors despite losing to Frankfurt. He's one of the most accurate and creative passers in the state, and as Bluefield gears up for a state title run, he's going to be the leader of the group. I expect him to be the main challenger to Maddox Twig's J.R. House Award. Ending today's show with my Kennedy Award watch for the best player in the state. This award doesn't return its winner like the J.R. House Award, as Princeton's Brad Mosser is off to WVU. It does, however, return 2 guys who received first-place votes last season. My main dark horse is Colton Roberson. After putting up over 4,500 total yards and 63 total touchdowns, and also leading his team with 154 tackles, I don't see how he shouldn't at least get some consideration this year. If Pendleton County ends up undefeated and he's putting up those numbers again, you can bet he'll be near the top of my list on this channel. The only thing that's holding him back again is that small class stereotype that holds a lot of players from winning awards in the small classes. But Colton Roberson is, by definition, one of the best football players in the state, and I think he should at least get some talk about for this award. Coming in at number 5 on my list is Bridgeport's Gavin Williams. The senior running back is an electric playmaker who nearly ran for 2,000 yards last season. Bridgeport should be near the top of 3A again, and if he's posting numbers like that again in his senior year, he will firmly be in the conversations for the Kennedy Award. At number 4 for me is Hayden George from University. While Hubig gets a lot of his share of credit, Hayden George should as well. One of the elite two-way players in the state, he's poised to have another big year for his senior season. After posting 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns with 7 interceptions on defense, those numbers, alongside University having a magical season, could land Hayden George in the Kennedy Award conversations. At number 3, I have Herbert Hoover running back David Robinson Jr. The Army commit is poised to have a huge year and one of the most talented packed offenses in the state. He's got big playability every time he touches the ball, and behind the Huskies line, he could post record-breaking numbers this year. His main concern would be there's only one football for this talent-packed offense, but when they're up, Robinson should be getting his number called a lot. Coming in at number 2 for me is Maddox Twig. One of the most electric prospects in West Virginia history, Twig threw for 2,200 yards and 26 touchdowns while running for another 1,018 more scores on the ground en route to an all-state bid in Morgantown's first state title since 2005. He's going to have another huge season this year, and I'm sure will be at the top of this list all year long. It's just whether or not a senior posts better numbers, in my opinion, and that's where number 1 on my list comes into play. Martinsburg's Boston Todd is the most electric player in the state. 2,100 total yards and 28 touchdowns alongside 3 interceptions. Todd's season last year would be good enough to win the Kennedy Award in a lot of years. He enters this year as one of the most motivated players I've seen all summer long. With just a 9-game schedule, his total numbers might not look as impressive, but with a number of huge matchups, I expect number 2 to show up in a big way in all those games. And if he's posting 2,000 yards and nearly 30 touchdowns again, I think he's the Kennedy Award winner for 2026. Thank you for watching episode 2 of Steve Sports Weekly Report, and thank you guys again for all the support on these videos. I'm trying to be a lot more consistent while juggling a job and being a full-time dad, but this is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm glad you guys are loving the content as much as I love making them. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share with a West Virginia high school football fan, and as always, stay blessed.